reaffirmed New Zealand's AA credit rating with a stable outlook. New Zealand also has a top AAA credit rating from Moody's and is rated AA with a positive outlook by Fitch. But today the ANZ issued a report about business confidence, which shows that there's a range of views about how things are tracking in New Zealand. Overall, I'd say New Zealand is not immune to world events, but we're well placed to withstand some economic ups and downs. As you may know, the 46th Pacific Islands Forum gets underway on Tuesday of next week. As usual, I will attend the forum, which this year is being held in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. Leaders are likely to discuss a range of issues, including climate change and fisheries, as well as wider development and political issues. The theme this year is strengthening connections to enhance Pacific regionalism, which is about encouraging a strategic focus to regional issues. My attendance will also provide a good opportunity to meet bilaterally with Pacific regional leaders. I'll be accompanied by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Murray McCully, and a number of Pacific Island leaders will also be travelling with us from New Zealand. I'll depart New Zealand next Tuesday, returning very late on Friday. Finally, just in terms of my movements this week, I'll be in Wellington today and tomorrow morning, and then I'll head to Auckland for a number of visits and meetings. I'll be travelling to Coromandel on Wednesday for a number of engagements. I'll head to Christchurch on Thursday for a regular visit. There'll be a range of events throughout the day. Questions?
I want to understand the final 4 flag designs will be released tomorrow. Is your favourite amongst the mix?
We'll have to wait and see, but Cabinet got, I guess, the heads up of what the 4 were like today. That's as per the process that was set out. We accepted those 4 recommendations made by the panel, and they'll be released tomorrow morning for public discussion.
Were you pleased with the 4?
Yeah, I think they're a good reflection of what was over 10,000 designs ultimately, distilled down to 40, and then ultimately a final 4 chosen. So the process now is that New Zealanders will have a referendum at the latter part of this year. Over that period of that referendum, they'll rank the flags in order of their top priority to their least preferred option. Ultimately, that will see one flag emerge as having the best score, if you like, and then there'll be a runoff in early 2016 against the current New Zealand flag.
Can you imagine one of those, when you look at those 4, do you imagine one of those as the new flag?
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3 there actually that could potentially be a new New Zealand flag, and I think it'll be for New Zealanders obviously to decide. But what I can tell you is I think there's movement happening in the debate. This isn't a debate that's new, as I've been pointing out in Parliament when Norman Kirk first started talking about the need for a new New Zealand flag. I think over the last few months, obviously there's been a bit of debate about the cost of the referendum process. I understand that. But equally what I'd say is, while I don't think about it in economic terms, I think ultimately if New Zealand had a new New Zealand flag and that better reflected the nation and we were more easily identified, there's huge economic benefits as well as other benefits for New Zealand. But in the end, it's about ultimately, do we have a flag for the future, one that is the best way of demonstrating our pride and passion for the nation. I think it is the right time to have that discussion. And I think New Zealanders will actively engage. And my sense of talking to audiences is that there's quite a bit of movement happening. People who initially thought, I might stay with the old flag, now starting to move over and say, look, I'll go with the new one.
Of the 40 drivers, would you have chosen any one of those 4, or would they have been your choice?
Oh, there's always going to be a range. There'd be a few that I think should be in. There'd be a few that I might have something a bit different. But look, every single person you talk to has a different view. And
do you think that there is 4 though?
I think there are four excellent ones in the New Zealanders will decide.
What about the silver fern versus the coral? Was there a mix in there?
Yeah, there's a mix. You'd expect there to be a mix. I mean, my preference has been around silver fern, simply because I think the story of New Zealand is based around that. It's been used in all sorts of ways by New Zealanders for a very long period of time. And in my mind, a flag that's going to be successful going forward is one that is going to be instantly recognisable, and one that we actually fly as we try and display to the world how proud and patriotic we are of New Zealand. And in a way, our athletes over the last 100 or so years have put that silver fern very much in the minds of international audiences. So that's my own personal view, but I only get one vote. In the end there'll be 2.5 million New Zealanders that will have the chance to decide if they want to.
Do you still have concern around the black flag and the link with ISIS?
Well, again, you know, there's a range of views. One thing to realise about this debate is there's a whole range of views and what people think. In the end, I like the process that we have. The process will mean that we get a good chance to debate it. New Zealanders get a chance to rank them, and ultimately there's a runoff. And I think, you know, people always say, well, why are there two referendums and all these things, but it comes back to the very point you're making. I think we've got to get to a point where they get a chance as a nation to decide what the contender should be, and until you know what you might be potentially changing to, I think a whole lot of people will probably sit on the fence if ultimately one emerges that they believe better reflects how they feel about the country and the way that we're going to be presented. I actually do think you'll get quite a lot of New Zealanders that will move, but it will be dependent on whether ultimately a flag is chosen that they believe is better than the current New Zealand
You
flag.
still have those
So-
private concerns though, the black flag with the
Well, they're always, there's lots of different factors. All I can say is, you know, the committee did a good job. I think they've settled in a pretty good place. Let's see how it goes tomorrow.
Previously you've expressed concern about black flag and the links to ISIS. Do you still have those concerns?
Well, truthfully, I've had a range of views. It's probably started. It should be a black flag and probably moved away from it a bit more. Wait and see what you think tomorrow.
So, Prime Minister, would you vote for one of these fours over the current flag?
Yeah, 3 of the 4 I can potentially vote for.
How
Over
many
the
times?
current one?
How many times have you changed your mind about which is your favourite?
A little bit. I just moved around a little bit. It's probably refined somewhat as you've seen the sort of, you know, what's been on offer and what the options are.
If the flag was changed, would you find it change your mind again after the fact?
Well, I'm a strong proponent of change. I've got a strong view on why I think that's a good thing for the country to do. And, you know, I think there are lots of myths. I really, if you want to go and give me some free PR, you know, I put out that Facebook post. Interestingly enough, it's reached about 1.8 million people. It's had over 700,000 views. It's been shared 3 times as much as any other Facebook post I've ever put up. So when people say sometimes, well, there's not much interest or whatever, there's a lot of interest. There's also a lot of views. But I think if people go and have a look at that, at least it will give them a chance to see why, you know, I think what I think.
Prime Minister, today's the last day of August. You said that the August tranche of aid will be reviewed. Has the August tranche of aid been reviewed for Nauru and has it been paid?
So my understanding is that's a matter that the Minister of Foreign Affairs is considering. He's likely to make a call on that in the next 24 to 48 hours. I'll leave that for him to make the decision, but he's getting pretty close to making that call.
Prime Minister Kelvin Davis, who was the Associate Education Spokesman for the Labour Party, attended a fundraiser over the weekend for a charter school and actually said that he just thought charter schools had some anomalies that needed to be ironed out, directly contrary to Labour policy. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, they seem to have a lot of policies, the Labour Party, where on the one hand they have a policy, but they do something completely different. They've got a policy to change the flag via a referendum. Apparently, at the moment, they're opposed. So, you know, the point is, I think when it comes to charter schools, there's a place for them. They're not going to be, you know, replacing wholesale the public system, but partnership schools have got a real role to play. They offer something a bit different. And I think, you know, what basically Kelvin Davis is reflecting is that up north, there have been some education issues and there have been some children falling between the cracks. And I'm not saying partnership schools are for everybody, but they can fill some important missing parts of the education equation. And I think he's quite rightly reflecting that if we continue to do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got up north, and that is not good enough results for all children of Northland.
Do you think Kelvin Davis has shown that there could be sections in the Labour Party that are interested in charter schools, particularly in Māori education?
Well, that would be my sense, and there's certainly been a fair bit of interest from Māori providers because they can see the advantage. I mean, notwithstanding that notwithstanding Whangaruru's had a few problems, I think people who understand the issues up there understand both how complex it is and how they are looking after a group of children, some of whom have been excluded from their schools, come from pretty poor backgrounds. It's very challenging territory, and hopefully they're making a difference for them.
Andrew Little didn't want Kelvin Davis and Kenny Henare to go along, but they went anyway. What does that say?
Well, it shows you that ultimately they can see the merits of partnership schools, even if their boss can't.
On the issue of Jetstar, do you have the regional flights? Do you have a view on whether government departments, ministries, etc., should choose between the airlines or should specify Air New Zealand When you're trying to encourage competition, it'd be good to have them taking the cheapest flight, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so when it comes to flights, in 2011, the government went down a procurement model for a 5-year period, and it did that to get the best deal for the taxpayer. My understanding is that that included Air New Zealand and about 4 other carriers, one assumes because they're using them internationally. Jetstar chose not actually to be part of that process, and the estimated savings over that 5-year period are up till now about $28 million. So it's been a good deal for the New Zealand taxpayer. It comes up for renewal in 2016. And of course Jetstar, if they want to throw their hat in the ring, would be free to do so. There's also nothing stopping government departments going outside of the bulk procurement. It's just that we get a better deal.
I understand they have to have 98% of flights with Air New Zealand though.
Yeah, well, I think they are free to go outside it. I mean, it does come down ultimately, we fly on lots of different airlines at times because it's required and it suits us. But, if Jetstar want to be part of the procurement process going forward in 2016 when that contract comes up, there'll be nothing stopping them putting their hat in the ring.
You guys are out there today saying this is great for the regions.
Yeah, I think it's great.
Competition, and you are pretty much solely putting your business, which must be in tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars, with one provider.
Yeah, and in fairness, that's because in part, Air New Zealand both provides a very good international service for us. In terms of the domestic service, they've had more flights to different locations and they've been servicing the regions. And Jetstar had the right to come and put their name into the ring in 2011 and actively chose not to. That doesn't mean the situation can't and hasn't changed. I mean, Jetstar are now starting to roll out regional services. Come 2016, they may well put their hat in the ring, and it'll be for those people that make that call to decide whether they should be selected or not.
Would you like to see them there in the interest of having a competitive domestic airline business?
Well, I went to the regional launch of Jetstar, notwithstanding that the government is a 51% owner of Air New Zealand. I did so and said at the time, I thought competition was good. It's good for Air New Zealand, it's good for the consumer.
Do you think South Island is neglected?
Yeah, I mean, look, they've gone through a process of selecting the 4 places. Obviously, it's a bit disappointing that I think one's Nelson and the others aren't there. So there'll be some disappointment in places like Invercargill. But let's see how it goes. I mean, there's competition in the marketplace now, or increased competition at least, and that might lead to more services. Who knows?
Still child, youth and family, how likely is it that parts of SIF or a part of SIF is privatised?
I think reasonably unlikely, but the point I was trying to make this morning is that Child, Youth and Family does outsource to the private sector already some contracts, and I think last year it was $81 million worth of business that went to private sector contractors. So I can't get up and say there's no involvement with the private sector because there already is that, and I haven't seen Paula Rebstock's report. I know it's coming, and I know it's pretty far-reaching, so I can't tell you exactly what she's going to do. I think the provision of support for the most at-risk children, which Child, Youth and Family have the legal responsibility for, I think that's likely to stay in government control, but I can't say there won't be little adjunct parts of it that aren't handled by the private sector.
Have you spoken to Minister Tolley about the content of that report yet?
No, I've seen some advice from my officials that she's received the report, and the advice I got was that what we saw from the Children's Commissioner, Dr. Wills' report, was consistent with the area that they've covered off. I think they're pretty similar terrain.
A lot of groups today have expressed concern about the possible privatisation of parts of SIF. Do you think they should be worried given what we're seeing with Serco and Mount Eden Prison?
No, because I think it's really, if you go back and listen to the conversation I had with Guy this morning on Morning Report, it was pretty clear. He asked me to rule out whether there could be any private sector involvement, and I can't do that because already we spend $81 million. And if I say no to that question, then where that leads you is the next time they let out a contract for any sort of private sector things, I'll be back on Morning Report with them quoting me back saying I said there was no private sector involvement when there is. So it's really important to understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying there will be wholesale outsourcing to the private sector of child, youth and family responsibilities. In fact, my view is it's unlikely there'll be much, but there's already some, and I can't rule out there isn't more in the future.
You did give quite strong hints this morning that at the front end, where there are all those assessments, that might be farmed out, so contracted out somewhere else. And yet Dr. Wills said that is the part that SIFs are actually doing rather well.
I don't think would be the way I specifically recall it in my mind. I think the point I was making was that there's 150,000 calls approximately received by Child, Youth and Family, and one of the issues is whether all the calls that are made to them are going to the right agency, and their people are having to sort their way through that. Now, that's been one of the issues that was raised at the front end, that a lot of resources put in there. Quite a lot of resources also put into the fact that, as I understand it, it's really between children that are age 2 that come into the notice of the service, who sometimes go into care ultimately, but that happens when they're 8, and they spend a lot of time going through the service between the ages 2 and 8. So I guess my point is there's just a lot of different things happening there, and Paula Rebstock has a wide ranging brief, but it is to go and look at whether the structure of Child, Youth and Families is set up in the right way, and whether the resources that are currently dedicated are going enough to the children in care that really need that help, or whether too much is spent on administration, some bits another agency could handle.
On petrol prices, margins have risen again to close to 40 cents a litre according to NB figures. Do you think there's a case for an inquiry, or that petrol companies have increased their margins too much?
Yeah, my understanding of that is that, well, firstly you saw Simon Bridges earlier in the year, I think in February, really sort of sent a shot across the warning across the bows of the oil companies. There may be a range of reasons why those margins have gone up. We need to look into that. I think at the moment the Commerce Commission is considering the application that Zed's got to buy, is it Caltex or whatever in New Zealand. So essentially at the moment, let's just let that process run. But yeah, in the end, I think consumers are entitled to know that when oil prices fall, that they will receive the benefit of that, because they certainly know they pay when oil prices go up. It's not a new debate, just looking at some of the international media over the weekend, there's been some discussion in a number of countries about whether those benefits are being passed on. It may partly be to do with the stock of oil that they hold and what they paid for it, and vis-a-vis what they pay now for stock they might receive a little later. But yeah, ultimately the Commerce Commission could look at it if they thought they needed to, but I think they're dealing with the issue in the first instance around the Z purchase.
Do you accept that the ANZ survey shows that the mood of the business sector is predominantly negative now?
No, because it was net positive. So if you have a look at it, it was lower than it normally is, but it was still it's at a 6-year low, but it's still net positive 27%. The second thing is, and this is the point that they make, ironically, even though they're saying there's a few things that could go wrong in the economy, they say it's really important we don't talk ourselves into a funk. I mean, that's exactly the point, isn't it? That you run the risk of talking the economy down when actually, even if you have a look at the ANZ report, what they expect for their own business activity is much more optimistic than what they think for the overall economy. So just generally, I'd say, everyone can see the headwinds that are potentially there in dairy and maybe in China. Everyone understands that there's some issues, but they themselves need to say, I think in the report, that you need to keep Chicken Little at bay, and I think I tend to agree with them.
But they also say that the economy is at risk of stalling.
Yeah, but I can only report their own thing back to them. I mean, there's a range of views, but if you look at what the banks have generally been saying, and it's consistent with what the Treasury and the Reserve Bank are saying, they're saying, yes, we'll grow at a slightly slower rate than we did last year, but they're still predicting positive growth of around 2 to 2.5%. And actually, if you have a look at what Standard & Poor's said on Friday, they, for the most part, they actually made some pretty positive comments about the future outlook for New Zealand.
But do you think it'll be enough growth to actually push unemployment down? Because ANZ and others are saying it's likely to stay up now.
Well, as I've said before, that's always quite a tricky question to answer, because it depends on a number of factors, what happens with participation amongst others. So I can't answer that question, I don't know.
Are you being selective about your figures? A net 29% of firms are pessimistic about the economy. That is the figure that's the lowest in 6 years.
Well, from the numbers I have,
that's
they're still net positive. But there's a range of different data in there, but net on net, they're still reasonably positive. So a net 12% of firms expect themselves to expand.
Yeah,
this is positive, but it's a 6-year low, well below the net long-term average of plus 27%. It's still positive.
It's 29% are pessimistic about the economy.
Well, they're more positive on their own outlook.
Treasury, though, also today was leaning more towards 2% growth, isn't it? And it is saying unemployment will most likely go up if migration numbers stay where they're at.
Yeah, there's so many different factors, isn't there? But the point is, they're still expecting growth of around about 2%. Might be higher, might be less. I can't tell you. It depends on what happens with a lot of different factors. What I do know is we are just in so much better shape than we were 7 years ago. I mean, the books are largely back in order.
But is it acceptable for unemployment to be allowed to go up under any circumstances when you could control it?
Well, you can't necessarily control it easily because it depends on a range of different factors. I mean, participation rate in New Zealand has been one of the highest in the OECD. We have one of the highest employment rates in the OECD, I think the fourth highest in the OECD. We actually have, broadly speaking, pretty good numbers. So it's not always directly the fact that it will track up. It might track up a little bit, it might not, I don't know. It depends on a number of different factors. But what the government can do is carry on doing what it's doing, keep flexibility in the economy, keep making sure we're integrated in the rest of the world, make sure that we have, the lowest cost, most flexible economy that we can have. And I think largely we're doing that.
Sure. Do you think unemployment at 6% is as good as it's going to get? Because last time the economy was growing for a long period of time, it got down under 4.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the budget numbers that came out, when Bill read the budget in May, I think their long-term outlook for unemployment was lower than 6%.
Today, Moby put out an analysis of where they think unemployment is going. It's based on the budget figures, and they say unemployment will go to 5.2%, and that's what they're going to use to determine immigration rules. Is that acceptable to use an analysis from a time when the outlook was that much more positive?
Well, yes, you have to go and ask them. I mean, they have armies of modelers that do all this stuff. They present the advice to us. We don't present methodology to them. I can't tell you the answer to that. So that's what they get paid the big bucks for. But what I can tell you is that if you look at migration, when you say the policies have changed, they haven't changed. There's been a net setting of about plus 45,000, and largely we've been around in that order of magnitude. Most of the people, when you talk about in the skilled category, are actually already in New Zealand. What's changed is the very point that we know that more Australians, for instance, come to New Zealand than New Zealanders going to Australia, and that's a massive turnaround from the 35,000 net that used to leave for Australia every year. Not a hell of a lot has actually changed. It's more on who leaves rather than who comes.
So we know paring back in those rules.
Well, I wouldn't say that. What I said is I don't think that there's been a dramatic change one way or the other to net migration. It's been the same policy settings for a long period of time. We did make it much tougher in 2009, and if we thought there was surplus skills, we would do that, and we put quite strong, and there already are very strong work testing on the categories that are given support by immigration to allow people to come in. And if we see surplus labour capacity in a sector like ICT or whatever, then it comes off the list of being approved.
So is the government looking at all at bringing down that 45k number or reassessing their skills?
I haven't seen any advice on that at the moment, no.
The consultation document on withholding tax on properties is up today, and once again it's targeted only at foreigners, like the Brightline number, the income, the inland revenue numbers.
Yeah.
Why are you targeting only foreigners? What evidence have you got that they are the cause of the Auckland housing problem?
We don't. The issue about withholding tax is because essentially it's the capacity for the IRD, if they get a positive ruling, to recover the funds. So in the case of a New Zealander that's domiciled and resident in New Zealand that buys and sells a property, says they're not subject to tax, and then ultimately gets found that they are, we know where they are, we can track them down, we have the capacity to seize assets and to get the tax that we're owed. If they are in China or they're in some other far-flung part of the world, we can't actually necessarily do that. And so the withholding tax is to give us the option of making sure that if they do owe the tax, we've already got it on hand. That's the issue.
How can you track them down if you don't require that they provide an IRD number as Inland Revenue proposed?
They are required. It depends on basically if they're buying a primary residence, but if they're foreigners, they do have to provide an IRD number.
No, I meant New Zealanders.
Oh, New Zealanders. Well, because again, there are a whole series of conditions in there. If you're a New Zealander that buys more than I think 3 residential properties within a 2-year period, you'd show up. But anyway, even without that, the IRD has a quite sophisticated capacity to see when properties are turning over when they're being bought and sold. And so that's why all of this money that we spend on extra inspectors, as we've put in previous budgets, has been so successful, because they can work out whether someone should owe tax. They go and talk to the taxpayer, and they more often than not get the tax if it's owed, and they have the capacity to do that. This is all about your ability to successfully prosecute a legitimate claim on tax where it's owed. And if you're domiciled in New Zealand, that's relatively straightforward. If you're not, then it's not.
So why didn't you accept the IRD advice to get everyone to declare their ID?
Well, there'd be a whole bunch of people who would say, you know, they don't feel they should have to give their IRD number if they're buying their own residential property, because that would be spun by some people as saying the government was about to bring in a stealth tax on your own primary residence when we're not.
But you said you weren't going to extend it out beyond 2 years. So
We say lots of things, that doesn't stop people reporting them. That's what's going to happen.
Prime Minister, the refugee crisis seems to be growing, obviously, around the world. Have you given any more thought to New Zealand's quota? Have you had any discussions with your leaders, given this is a growing global problem? New Zealand's got a seat on the UN Security Council. We should be doing something, shouldn't we?
Well, I would argue with you we are doing something. We do take 750 people. We're consistent. We do a good job of that. The review period for that is every 3 years. So the next review takes place in 2016. We'll get a series of advice then about whether New Zealand could take more. As I've said in the past, I put a high premium on the fact that we do a good job of looking after people when they come here and give them a full wraparound service. And if we were ever going to increase that number, I'd have to be convinced that we can make sure we give the same level of service. Because I think you do a disservice to people if you just bring them in and literally kind of half dump them on the street. You've got to give them that proper service, and it's a long-term commitment. If you go and have a look at the results of refugees that we've resettled in New Zealand over now a long period of time, you'll see it takes quite a while and quite a lot of support to basically get them up to speed, and that is as it should be. But I'm just saying we've got to make sure we do that job properly.
But haven't events kind of overtaken? There's an urgency now. I mean, there's for a response from all global players.
No, I think we can stick to the schedule. I mean, it's not that far away now. It's 2016, so we're 4 months basically from the end of the year. I mean, I think everyone accepts the enormity of the challenge of what's taking place. But New Zealand can pride itself in the fact that it's one of the countries that's consistently taken refugees for a long period of time. There are quite a few countries actually that don't take refugees.
But given that we've taken such a hard line on events in Syria, wouldn't it be better to act rather than speak?
Well, we've done a number of things around support for Syria, and in the end, as part of those 750 refugees, we typically don't tell UNHCR who to give us and who not, but we can emphasise things. But look, in terms of the debate, I mean, there's been quite a bit of debate around whether the number should change. Some people think it should stay at 750. Some people think it should go to 1,000, 1,500. Even if we went to 1,000, 1,500, people would still say, compared to the 52+ million people, they would say it's a pretty small
I think
thing.
it's more that it hasn't changed for decades though, that people are taking issue with it. So if there was a change at the margins.
Well, there'll be a review in 2016, and we'll ask them for the advice of whether we can handle that.
Amnesty proposed like an emergency quota, an extra, I think 250, just given circumstances. Is that something you would consider in the interim?
I haven't seen any advice on that. No one's come to me with that proposal.
But you wouldn't, off the top of your head, you would
They-
consider an emergency quota?
Well, they didn't raise that with me when they saw me. I'm not saying they haven't suggested it, but they didn't raise it. They did raise with me a higher target when they visited me, but they didn't raise an emergency one.
Does that seem like a good idea to you though, an emergency extension?
Well, it all just comes back to the point I made earlier. I think we've got to do a good job for people. So I don't know how far through the process of this year's numbers we are, and the capacity to deal with it. Okay.
Read this wrong. I made a mistake. I got this story.